Hello there. Welcome to Justice for All's Connections with Coffee. My name is Joel DeWitt, Executive Director at Justice for All. I have Gordie Siebring here with me. This is episode 15 for those who are keeping track. I know Susan keeps track, and I try to stay on track of that as well. Gordie is someone who's, well, where are you from? And then we'll kind of get into how we've gotten to know each other a little bit.
Well, originally I was born in the U.S., and through all my childhood and early years, I lived in the U.S. A good portion of that time in Iowa. I was a farmer in Iowa up until 1992.
Okay.
And then in 1993, an opportunity came up to go to Ukraine for 3 weeks as a volunteer. Well,
who was that with? Was that like with an organization of some kind, or?
Yes, that was with a seed corn company that had set up a program where they were shipping seed corn, combines, sprayers, and planters to Ukraine. And there was 100 Iowa farmers that got recruited to go with this project as window dressing, and I was one of those 100.
Sure. Okay.
So here we are 32 years later, and I'm still in Ukraine.
You are? Wow.
The project ended right away after the first year. But then I picked up, and I've done a lot of other things in Ukraine since then, and here we are.
So since 1992, has that been your main residence or mostly residence? Or I don't know. You divide time a little?
Up until COVID hit in 2020, I had spent about half the year in Ukraine, half the year in the States, traveling back and forth for business.
Sure.
We were very active in exporting used farm equipment from Iowa to Ukraine for many years. And in 2015, when the war first started, really, with Russia, then I went into the farming business, and I've been involved in that ever since.
So do you have like a green card or something to work there? I don't know. These are questions.
Yeah,
that I'm just...
I work with a temporary residency card.
Okay.
It gives me temporary residency for 3 years.
Okay. So you're a farmer.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So you farm in Ukraine. Is it a big industry out there?
Farming is the major industry of Ukraine.
Okay.
It relies heavily on farm exports for its financing the country.
Okay.
Yeah, it's it is the major industry for Ukraine.
all the things that they ship out that help fund their government and all the other things that they want to do in business side of it, like what do they ship out mostly? Corn, maybe? I don't know.
A lot of corn in recent years, some soybeans, lots of wheat, barley. They're one of the top wheat and barley exporters, one of the top, I think it's top 4 corn exporters, and they're the world leader, or it trades between them and Russia on sunflowers and sunflower oil.
Okay. How big is the Ukraine? Like if we were to look at in comparison to the U.S., how much of that is taken?
About the same size as the state of Texas.
So that's pretty good size.
Pretty good size.
I mean, Texas is quite large.
Yeah.
You can drive across that thing in like about 4 days. That's with a straight road, but. So you got connected to be out there. What's transpired kind of since then? Like 92 until now is a lot of years. Most of the time you said back and forth between here being the U.S. or Iowa.
Yeah. Like I say, for quite a few years I was equipment trading. I'd come back to Iowa, go to auctions, purchasing equipment for resale in Ukraine, rebuilding and resale in Ukraine. I had 6 different dealers scattered around Ukraine.
Okay.
And I'd come back here, source equipment. Then where I lived at that time in central Iowa, we had a facility for loading equipment into 40-foot containers and shipping. And there was a time when the business was very good. We were doing a container a week. Okay. And but the war brought that to an abrupt stall.
Yeah, I would imagine. So you would ship things like discs, planters, corn heads, pretty much anything you could find, or
anything that clients were looking for. It could be planters, it could be discs, it could be other tillage equipment, combines, sprayers, just whatever
they're looking for. You have contacts and people in the Ukraine that would tell you, hey, we have people looking for these things.
Yeah.
And you would then be able to source some of that around here, and if it needed some mending or needed some repair, that would be able to take care of before shipping it out.
No, we did all the repair and rebuilding in Ukraine.
Oh, okay.
Labor costs are significantly less in Ukraine,
I can believe
and
that,
very good mechanics over there.
Okay,
and so we had no problem in finding enough people to do all the rebuild and refurbishing there. Huh. We'd send the parts in most cases, and went from there.
Okay. All right. So importing things, exporting things, shipping things, that's a lot of That was your job for 20 some odd years in different places.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wild. Did you have family, or how that?
Yeah, I have family in the States. Now the children are gone from the home. They're married and have grandchildren.
Okay, all right.
But through those years, I had a family in central Iowa. Several times my family traveled to Ukraine, visited, saw what it was like.
Sure.
For a number of years, my mother would come to Ukraine and do vacation Bible schools in villages in Ukraine.
Cool.
And she did that for probably 8 or 10 years. So
wow.
The family's been involved in Ukraine as well.
So when you would travel out there with if you're gone for 6 months at a time, that's kind of a long stretch.
No, in those days when it was half and half,
Yeah.
I'd be in Ukraine for a month or two, then home for a month or two.
Oh, I see.
So it'd be divided.
So it wasn't all.
No. It'd be divided into 3 or 4 trips.
Okay, all right. Let me ask you. I don't know that I've ever thought about it before, but your mom doing vacation Bible school and doing some of that kind of things. What's your story? You're a believer.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Can I ask what your story is a little bit in that?
I was raised in the Lutheran Church. Then I went off to college and had a more dynamic experience, I guess you would say.
Okay. Where'd you go to college at?
Colorado State University, majored in agriculture.
Okay.
And then, got much more active in my faith in college at Colorado State University. Places you usually think you fall away from your faith.
Yeah. It's different for everybody, really.
Yeah.
But you're on your own out there in Fort Collins and figuring it out. And you're like, I think God's kind of providing a way for you a little bit. Yeah. Maybe. I don't know.
I was fortunate enough to meet the right people.
Okay.
Steered me down the right path. And in the years after that, I was a Sunday school teacher part of the time, even did some lay pastoring some of the time. Okay. I lived in small-town Iowa, and like many small towns, it was difficult sometimes to get pastors to fill the pulpit.
I can see that.
During the late 80s and early 90s, I did pulpit filling.
Okay,
so,
all right.
Yeah.
Well, you got a good voice for it, I would say. You've probably been told that before.
I've heard it, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure. So, no, that's cool. I'm glad. Yeah, it's nice to, as someone, I went to a private Christian school. I went to Dort, and one of the things that I chose that school was because I was a little bit apprehensive about what I would be able to find if I went to a bigger public university, because I wasn't, not that I wasn't a Christian, but I was, not real hot on fire for Jesus, right? So yeah, that's neat to hear someone who went to a public school who went and moved into that direction and leaned into what God was doing in their life. That's cool. Glad to hear it. So I got to know your dad before he passed away, somewhat out of the blue. I don't even remember how it was that he walked into our building here. This was probably in 2021, maybe? I don't even know.
Yeah, it would have been 20 or 21, I suppose, yeah. Because I remember him telling me about meeting you, but I don't. That'd be 20, I would say, 21.
Yeah, because it was. I did not know who he was. His name also is Gordon, and he, sort of introduced himself. And I want to say through living in George is where he was living at the time, or or maybe that's where where you grew up there.
Yeah, he grew up there. Yeah,
he grew up there. Okay, so he came in and was saying that you were in the Ukraine and he wanted to ship a container to you of humanitarian aid and supplies and things. Did it start? He was, I guess how I saw it was he was sort of the one who was the impetus behind that. Is that
okay? Then we got to change the date just a little bit. If that was your first meeting, that would have been in the spring of 2022. Okay, shortly after the war started.
Okay,
yeah. And my wife
was it 22?
I'm sorry.
Really?
Yeah,
I felt like it was longer ago than that, but okay,
yeah, that was when the war started. My wife and the youngest daughter had been instrumental in getting 3 containers right from the start, launched out of Marshalltown, Iowa area.
Yeah. Okay. And
then Dad, he wanted to get on board, and so he started an effort up here.
Yep. Yeah. So it was 22, because it wasn't too terribly long after that he had passed away, wasn't it?
Yeah. He died in 23.
Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I will say it was kind of neat the way that things get presented into your path. And I guess I feel that here at Justice for All, we can just be the conduit through which things that are destined, that God has planned to happen, will happen. And your dad walking in was one of those things. Can you give listeners a sense of, maybe where some of that stuff goes? I think we've done 5 of them. Is that right?
It was either 5 or 6 that we just launched.
Yeah.
And now that you started mentioning dates, I got to take that back. He died in 22, so you met him in the spring, and he got that first container organized.
Was it that? Yeah, that must have been real
met
close.
With Carol.
Yeah.
And Carol Groen.
Yes.
And that's, and then she took it from there.
Yeah, because she's been the main organizer of it for the last, if this was 6, then for the last 5, she's kind of been the one that has been doing that. It's been about, well, we're only in 24, almost 25. It's been 2 a year almost, hey?
Yeah.
So what then, when you receive it on the other end, so I guess, or maybe you can share a little bit about what goes into the container or what has been on the containers and kind of where that goes and what that looks like.
The containers contain a lot of humanitarian aid, clothing, some food items, non-perishable food items, a lot of wheelchairs, which have been really needed.
Yeah.
With the war, there's been a lot of people, a lot of soldiers injured, even civilians injured that live in some of those frontline cities. And this last container had more than 50 wheelchairs.
Yep.
A couple of the other containers have had a large number too, and those are gone instantly as soon as they get there. Within a week, they're all gone.
So I'm not familiar with I'm not familiar with Ukraine. I've looked on maps and that sort of thing. So like, if you had to explain it to someone, where does the container get shipped to? And then, when you say front lines, I know that there's the eastern part is kind of a little more rough. I don't know if that's the right term, but that's more of it. But
the containers, most of them have arrived in the city of Vinnytsia, and it's kind of central, a little bit western Ukraine.
Okay.
And right within that city, there are 2 major veterans hospitals. So that's where some of the wheelchairs will go. Others will go to, there's another veterans hospital up near Kiev.
Okay.
And then to individuals who might have been injured, if we get word of somebody that lives down in one of the more frontline cities to the east, 300 miles away. We have a very good shipping service in Ukraine.
Okay.
Like your UPS or FedEx, only much cheaper and much faster.
Oh.
I can put a package in my town onto, it's called New Post, and they'll have it 600 kilometers, 400 miles away the next morning.
Wow.
And it costs, relatively speaking, next to nothing. Wow. Very fast, very efficient. And so we can send wheelchairs, whatever, all over Ukraine in just a matter of, a day, 2 maximum. And it costs little or nothing. I think a wheelchair, ship it all across country, might cost $6.
That is, that's not a lot to ship something like that across the country, at least not for what it would cost for out here anyway. Certainly. So so it's things that go out to the front line. What are some other things besides wheelchairs that have been like the most impactful or been the most, something sought after, I guess? It
really depends. The clothing, bedding, and that kind of stuff goes to refugee communities. There's been a lot of displaced people from this war. Yeah. A lot of them they've had to flee their homes with nothing. And so we try and target those groups for the clothing and bedding materials that come. There's been some generators. Of course, those are very much needed.
Sure. I would imagine the electricity and power and things are in and out or mostly out.
Right. The first 2 years of the war, it was, especially in the cities, it was out a lot.
Okay.
And as you go closer to the front, again, a lot of power interruptions.
Sure.
We provided generators to some first aid stations, smaller hospitals, and that kind of thing. And our current is different here than it is there.
Yeah.
But there's people who make adapters for us so that these locally purchased generators can be used over there.
Okay. All right. So they're real mechanically oriented, it seems like. I mean, as what I'm hearing from a little bit from you.
Yeah, very much so. Whether it's electronics, whether it's computers, whether it's repair of cars and vehicles, they're very good hands-on, self-taught. How
did you get connected to? How did you get connected to some of these places? Just since you've been in and out of the country and been there for 30 some odd years, you've gotten to know people, and that's how this sort of distribution works. Or are there certain organizations that you've gotten to know, or?
My business partner and I over there had formed our own humanitarian aid company, for lack of a better term to call it.
Sure.
He's a younger gentleman, also a believer, named Bogdan. And Bogdan has a lot of connections, both with military and other humanitarian aid organizations. And then myself, known a lot of people since this many years working over there.
Sure. Yeah. Because I'm just like I wouldn't even know the first place to think about something like that. Like when you start describing 300 kilometers away of someone of shipping something somewhere, you must have known someone or have someone in mind that can go to distribute that.
Between myself and particularly Bogdan, we have a lot of connections.
Oh, that's awesome.
My farm also served as a forward base for some of the military early in the war. I was only maybe 20 miles as the crow flies from where the invasion first took place.
Oh, wow.
So for the first month and a half of the war, we had a lot of soldiers based at our farm. Get to know those guys. They also, as they go forward, they say, these guys need help, this area needs help, and so they'll contact us and let us know when they come across an area that's in need.
Okay. But doesn't sound like that you have that many soldiers in the front or in your area currently anymore. I mean, you're 2 years, 3 years in almost.
Our village, the first month and a half of the war, we probably had close to 300 soldiers staying in the village, in various places, abandoned houses, in a school, wherever we could find them.
Wherever shelter.
They were staying in barns.
Yeah.
But then in April of 2022, the Ukrainians drove the Russians back north, back into Belarus again, and liberated our area. Since that time, we still have soldiers come there, but it's on a rotational basis. They go down to the front. They might serve for 6 months, 9 months, sometimes a year, and then they need some R&R.
Okay.
And so they'll send them back to our area, just for a month or so of recoup.
Do some training, but mostly just relax.
Yeah, just mainly.
Yeah. Relax in a war as best you can. Yeah. Wild. I was going to go somewhere after you were talking about some of the... Oh, I know. When you, I guess... I don't know. Can you give me any sort of stories that are, it's obviously centered around the war, and that's the thing that's been going on for 3 years now in the most urgent sense, I guess I would say. Is there anything that you just want to share that's like, oh, this happened and it was amazing, or terrible, or terribly amazing? I don't know.
Okay. Well, there's a lot of stories in there. I remember a couple strong memories from early in the war.
Sure.
Like I say, I lived very close to where the front line was early, and our little town got bombed quite often, mainly air to surface missiles. And there was a grain storage area just about 400 yards from my house. And the Russians intentionally hit that with from helicopters and jets 4 different times or 5 different times, trying to explode some nitrogen-based fertilizer that was stored there. Because they knew if they hit that, they would just level our village.
A further explosion after that. Okay.
But one Sunday afternoon, I just happened to step outside, and they were attacking again, and heard the loud explosion. Most of the windows burst in the homes near mine. Fortunately, I had new windows in my house, so they withstood it. But then I heard a clink and looked down, and here was a piece of shrapnel landed right next to me from that explosion.
Man.
So, early in the war, there was a lot of excitement. Since then, I've been down to the front on 4 or 5 different occasions, taking supplies down for the soldiers. We've donated several vehicles. We've donated a 4-wheel drive vehicle and taken generators, etc., down to them.
All right.
So been down there on a number of occasions. Was in the city of Bakhmut just about a month before it fell to the Russians.
Okay.
And that was an exciting trip.
How long ago was that?
That would have been in 23. Yeah,
okay.
In early March 23, I was in Bakhmut, late February. February, yeah.
So that was a year into it. Where is it? How does it stand currently, I guess?
After I was there, the next month after that, the Russians took Bakhmut. But here's the interesting thing. Then I was down again in 23 to a town called Kramatorsk, not very far from Bakhmut. And in that year's time, since I'd been there, the Russians had lost tens of thousands of soldiers, but they'd only gained about 6 kilometers or 4 miles of territory in that ensuing year.
That's not a real great.
It's not a real great
soldier to. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Per square kilometer, it's costing a lot of soldiers on both sides, but much more heavily on the Russian side.
Sure. So like the Ukraine has. I'm not the most current on this, but it has their own army. They're pushing back against the Russians and that sort of thing, obviously making it harder for them if they can't gain new Ukrainian territory. Or like they have their own, right? Yes, they have their own military.
The military, the initial Russian invasion of Ukraine took place in 2014 when they took portions of Lugansk and Donetsk Oblast or region and Crimea. Now, at that time, Ukraine had not much of an army at all. But in the ensuing years, they've been beginning to build up their army, make it quite a bit stronger, get it much better equipped. But nonetheless, it was nothing to, it's small compared to the Russian army.
Sure.
So the Ukrainian army began to be rebuild itself in about 2014.
Yeah.
Fast forward to the start of the war in 2022, it still was not a large army, but it was better equipped than it was in 2013.
Sure, when those other areas were
right
occupied or taken over or whatever.
The first days and weeks of the war, there was a lot of enthusiasm. There were a lot of young guys signing up for the war.
Yeah.
And then Ukraine also started drafting, but they do things differently in Ukraine. They started drafting guys in their 40s and 50s. Their rationality was, let's save, if we can, our youngest, the new generation that has not really had a chance to live.
Sure.
Let's take the 40-year-old. Let's take the 50-year-old. Now, I know that's counter to a lot of American military thinking, but it's a little bit different when you're defending your own country rather than being sent to a foreign war in Vietnam or wherever it is. So sending the 40 and 50-year-olds turned out to be a really good decision because they didn't scare easy. They also didn't have that adrenaline surge that'll just send you in to do knot-headed things.
Do things that you shouldn't be doing.
They'll think the process through. It also sent you a bunch of guys who were already well-skilled in mechanics, electronics, etc., who could repair stuff.
They've lived a little.
Yeah. The Ukrainian army doesn't have a motor pool. It doesn't have tens of thousands of its own jeeps and personnel vehicles.
What do they
lot
use?
of the vehicles are civilian vehicles.
Wow.
They just paint them camouflage and send them down for troop transport or whatever.
Sure.
Our own company has sent down several vehicles. We have a place that they take them and they paint them into camouflage colors.
Okay. Wow.
And those guys will use those as makeshift ambulances or for troop transport or whatever.
Yeah.
So, it's not just like the American Army. And therefore, we have a lot of people, by sending these older guys that can deal with this stuff. They, they don't have to call up a mechanic and come out and repair their vehicle.
Okay.
They've been gradually dropping, as needed, they've been gradually dropping the draft age. It's down to about 27 now.
All right.
The Biden administration, I'm not getting political here, but the Biden administration had really tried to put pressure on Zelensky to draft the 18-year-olds, but he steadfastly refused. He said, no, we got to save those guys for last. We need to preserve our younger generation.
Never heard this.
So, yeah.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
I mean, when you explain it, it makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm. And like I say, you see that down there on the front. These guys are living in difficult conditions, and yet the 50-year-old really doesn't complain about it.
Sure.
If he doesn't get a shower for a week, that's all right. He'll just go get by.
Roll along with it. I'm here defending my country.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wow. That is an interesting perspective or an interesting way to go about defending your country. Yeah, I guess being that I'm American and I've never been drafted, but we've never had an invasion in this country either. So, but to go about it, I would think, send them younger ones out there, let the older ones, they're the ones who should be hanging out, but they do it the other way around. That's kind of...
And they're not... And the older guys aren't, behind the front lines. I mean, these guys are right down in the front. Sure. When I was in Bakhmut, it was very active fighting, and I remember I was driving, and a guy poked his head out of a tank, and if he was 70 if he was he was anything, and still actively engaged. So
okay, all right. Well, that's interesting stuff there to me. Are there other things? I know Carol has mentioned wanting to load up another container at some point in the spring or early summer. I don't know exactly what that looks like. I'm guessing there's probably going to be a need for a while.
Yeah. There's not really... There was hope that when Trump was elected, he came with the idea that he was going to end it in a day, but nobody took that literally. And now I think, the signs are pretty clear this isn't going to end anytime soon. Vladimir Putin recently did an address. It was a rambling over 4-hour address. And he didn't name anything about the supposed biolabs or anything like that. He just said, we were kind of bored and we needed to sharpen up a little bit, so we went into Ukraine.
So we just decided to head south there. Yeah. I don't know.
And he doesn't show any signs of letting up. There is pushback from within his country, but he's done a very interesting thing. many of the soldiers that are dying on the battlefield now, the Russian soldiers, come out of the Central and Eastern Asian republics of Russia. Now, these are areas that were very much impoverished. They had in many places, a high Muslim population.
Okay.
And they were a little bit problematic for the Kremlin. So it works to go into these places where people were making maybe $2,000 a year and say, okay, we'd like your son to come and fight.
Yep.
We'll pay him $2,000 a month.
Oh.
And we'll pay a huge death benefit if he dies in the war. So these families are sending off their sons, and they're getting that money. And if he dies, they're getting this large payout. So it has kept, and those guys have had heavy, heavy losses, but the families have been compensated. So there's not a lot of pushback, but there's some pushback.
Sure.
But if you were taking Moscow and St. Petersburg boys and sending them into war, you'd have much harder pushback.
I see.
If they were dying at the same rate these same guys from the Eastern and Central Asian republics were dying, there would be huge public pushback.
Huh.
But yeah, there's some guys coming out of Moscow, but a lot of them are coming out of these impoverished areas where they're being paid a big bounty to go and fight the Ukrainians.
This is go fight the Ukrainians, and if you don't, then I guess we'll pay off your family. That is just seems cruel.
North Koreans have come into the fight, as everybody heard recently. Same kind of deal. They're getting compensation in North Korea. There was originally 10 or 11,000 that came in, and now it's estimated that there's quite a few more in the pipeline out of North Korea.
Wow. North Korea and Russia are they allies? Or?
Yeah, they were politically allied. They've grown much stronger allies during the course of the war. Putin has, given some technology to North Korea. North Korea has become a good bud. They've shipped tens of thousands of containers of ammunition, of artillery shells, of all kinds of military hardware to Russia. They've been their main supplier because honestly, the Ukrainian army worked through Russia's supply of tanks and armored vehicles and artillery. They whittled that down really quickly because a lot of it was not in good condition before the war. Generals, commanders have been reporting, we have 1,000 tanks here, all of them are in running order. Well, they come to find out only half of them are in running order or less.
Yeah.
So no, North Korea has been a big supporter of Putin.
This just makes me think. It's just weird to think that, as someone who's never lived through any kind of a draft or a war or anything, but I've talked to people who've gone through. My grandpa was in World War II, and so I had known him when I was little. And then people who've been in Vietnam and have seen combat and all of that kind of stuff. It just sounds, I don't know. It sounds old when you say, it sounds like things that you're like, wow, they would just read about this in a history book. But this is going on right now.
Yeah. And what's really weird about the Ukraine war now, it's stagnated somewhat because we're using the same tactics that were used in World War I, where you have trenches. It's trench
Is that
warfare.
right?
Yeah. There's thousands of kilometers of trenches, most of them hand dug along those front lines, and that's why it makes it really tough to advance when you have to run out of your trench and.
Let me just jump up into line of fire here and go dig another hole real quick. Golly, I can see where that would be slow going. I don't know if I had to pivot off of that. I don't know. That is a lot of the information that we're looking for. So I guess just to sort of recap a little bit, and maybe we want to talk about any other additional things, but in conjunction with, initially with your dad and then with Carol, I believe it's 6 containers that we've had a part in shipping out to you, and you and your business partners and contacts have been able to distribute. If they're outside of wheelchairs, you mentioned were something that were valuable, and generators. Are there other things that are sought after or?
Before the organization of each container, Carol's been very good about contacting me and asking about specific needs.
Yeah.
And, we've kept it pretty much all non-military, just civilian.
Yes. Yeah.
And she's done a very good job zeroing in on the things we need. Another thing we've done a lot of, and it wouldn't occur to you and I maybe how needed this was, is pet food. There's been a lot of
There has
pets
been pet food
displaced.
that got sent, for sure.
Yeah. A lot of pets displaced. There's one place in Odessa. They're keeping over 400 cats, and I don't know how many dogs. These are ones that, from the frontline cities, pets have been abandoned, and they actually send vans in there, pick up these pets that they find wandering around and bring them back. And they have several veterinarians that work with them, repairing what can be repaired.
Sure.
But it's been an interesting thing. Carol asked, "Do you need pet food?" And I called around a little bit and I said, "Yeah, there's a huge need for pet food.
Wow.
There's a number of organizations doing this, rescuing those frontline pets."
Interesting.
So
interesting.
Something you might not think of.
Nope.
But no, Carol does a real good job on zeroing down on what we really need and trying to get people to contribute those things.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So I guess, as we look into 2025 and as things go, not only with the war out there, but ways that we can, support here. We'll communicate. I get information from Carol and we try to push that out. And I know she's been really diligent in getting churches involved and across the denominations, across the area, just to get the items that you guys are looking for onto a container. And you were here last week, Tuesday, or a couple of Tuesdays ago, to help pack the container. Like, that thing is all the way full of anything. I mean, it was hand packed, a 40-foot container that was 9 feet high. There's a lot of stuff in there.
There was a lot of stuff. You guys had really gotten some great donations, and we filled that thing front to back all the way to top. I don't know if you could have got a glass of water in there when we were done.
It was tight. It was tight.
It was full. Yep.
No, that's pretty neat. I think it's neat. Not that I don't think we would do it anyway, because when you hear about, there's a war and there's a container going, you're trying to think what you can do to help out. But just to hear from you on the other end what it looks like, just receiving it and where it can be distributed to, and knowing at least that there are contacts that are out there, and the needs that are out there, from frontline to pets to all of the information then in contacts and community that you've built up in that area is pretty cool.
Another thing that you asked about things that are helpful in the container. This last container, there was a whole bunch of folding chairs.
Yes, there were.
One container ago, I don't know how they showed up, but they did. Nobody had even thought about them.
Yeah.
But Carol said, "Should we send these folding chairs?" Yeah, whatever. They hit the ground and they were gone instantly.
Really?
The reason being that, first off, you have, in particular churches, you have churches now that have taken in a lot of people from the east.
Sure.
And so,
as people are displaced heading west out of combat zones.
They come to these churches and they just don't have enough tables. They don't have enough chairs.
Sure.
They don't have enough bedding for these people.
Right.
And then, on the other hand, as you go farther east, once they heard about the folding chairs, I mean, something so simple. We've had them forever here.
Yes.
It's a brand new concept there.
Huh.
Some of these churches farther to the east are saying, well, yeah, send us some, because Russia has destroyed over 400 churches, synagogues, Orthodox churches, Protestant churches. The most recent church they hit in Kiev was a Catholic church.
Really?
So a lot of these churches that have been partially destroyed and are going someplace else to do their worship are looking for someplace, something simple like folding chairs.
They didn't put their pews on their back and tried to haul those out.
And maybe their pew didn't exist anymore.
No, probably not. Probably not.
So, yeah.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, no, we did send a good amount of chairs.
Yeah, and it was one of those items that I never thought about it until they got there and somebody saw it and they said, we need a lot of these.
We can use a lot of this.
Yeah.
No, that's cool. Like those are sort of the neat sort of things that, that is nice to... It's nice to hear and nice to be able to share with folks that it's getting to the right spot, and the good that can happen through what the Lord has connected through your connections in the Ukraine, Carol and your dad, and just how our ministry can just supplement and support that is it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, and they've got some great guys here at your organization, helping us load that day.
Yeah,
3 or 4 guys that made me look young, but they work like dogs.
I'll tell you, man,
tireless.
The volunteers that we have here are second to none. It's incredible.
Yeah, you have a great staff here and great workers.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I appreciate the time, and I know, you're stateside for a little while, but heading back here in a little bit. I just, I pray that everything continues to go well for you. I'm glad to see that you're here. Glad that you were able to make the connections that you've been able to make, and I think having the heart to help those who are in need. And I believe the Bible calls all of us to do that the best that we can, and I very much appreciate you doing that in the Ukraine and through all the war efforts and everything too.
Well, and we really, not just me, but everyone who hears about Justice for All and who hears about Carol Groen.
Yeah.
I mean, she has just really done Herculean work on making this all come together.
Yeah, it really has.
And it's everybody appreciates very much your commitment and Carol's commitment and time and organization.
Yeah. Well, that's the long and short of it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the conversation and enjoyed the learning about the war. lot of things that I didn't know. Of course, I'm only 40, whatever I am, and so I don't know a lot of things. Someone who's been around a little bit more knows a lot more. So thank you very much for watching. This is Justice for All's Connections with Coffee. I'm Joel DeWitt, Executive Director at Justice for All. This is Gordie Siebring, who's a Ukrainian farmer, do-gooder, Christian, good guy. So thanks very much for watching, and God bless.